Okay. Good evening, everyone. Very nice to see you all at this special meeting of the leadership team. Thank you for coming. I think we're going to start, as we usually do, with 72 seconds silence. So we remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. So please could you turn off any phones that you might have. And Kim, could you please let me know when the 72 seconds is over? Thank you. Stop. Okay, this evening we've got apologies for absence from Frances and Siren, Joss Rendell and Emma Will. Do we have any declarations of interest? No, don't believe so. Okay, so we've only got one paper this evening, which is a very important paper, because it's about planning for the next phase of the council's work on Grenfell. So, as we all know, we have in place a recovery programme, but it ends in 2024. And the timelines have really moved. So we've got all sorts of things which are going to happen post 2024. So we'll have perhaps ongoing civil litigation, a criminal investigation, the results of the inquiry, the future of the tower, and any memorial decision that is to be made. So what this paper really asks is really two questions. What specific and additional support do people need? You know, what additional support should we give to the bereaved survivors and residents who live close by? And the second question is really about how we as a council, as a whole council, not just bits of us, respond to the challenge, which is how do we be the best in the light of Grenfell? And this paper really concentrates on that second question, because if you look at the top of page 7, you know, that is what our challenge is. When people say, you know, we want RBKC to be somewhere where other boroughs come and say, you know, we need to rejig our housing policy. We have boroughs where people say this borough is really doing things in the right way. But that gives us some ideas. But what does being the best really, really mean? And I suspect if you go around the room, it'll mean something different to each of you. And I suspect when we go out to consult, it'll be different for people. And that's why it's incredibly important that we do go out to people, and especially bereaved and survivors and local residents, to find out what the best means to them. Does it mean safety? Does it mean landlord-tenant relationship? Does it mean the way we treat residents? Is it the way we work with residents? And that's what we need to find out. That's what we need to consult on. So that at the end of the day, we have a shared vision and we have a shared set of priorities and we have a clear plan of where we're going to. And whatever consultation we do with this will form part of our wider engagement and will be absolutely informing and central to our council plan. So the plan for the Grenfell Legacy Conversation, you'll see at the top of page 8. And I'm going to hand over to Sof now, really, to talk about about the consultation and how it's going to work and what the stages are and what what questions we're going to be asking.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yes, obviously Callum is going to speak more to the paper than me, but I just wanted, before I hand over to you, I just wanted to say thank you very much for this, because what we see before us tonight has been changed many times, and we've gone backwards and forwards, and I probably will be changed again in terms that I want to make it very clear that this is a framework and it's fluid. And I can't stress enough that part of this is a consultation. We really want to hear from and to be led by the bereaved, the survivors, and everyone in the community. And I know that that is part of that, but this is very much a work in progress. I think it's the most important thing to bear in mind when we're looking at this, and will help everybody work out what's going to be for the next stage in the journey, and to ensure that the learning from the terrible tragedy of Grenfell is embedded in the council, and that it will never be forgotten. And so just on page 3, you will just see where we are. There's the little graph, little chart that just says we've had the Grenfell response. We're now in the Grenfell recovery, as Elizabeth said, which goes on to March 2024. And so this paper is discussing what could potentially be the next steps. And one aspect you do talk about is partnerships, so we're keen to hear more about that. We've already had lots of feedback from the scrutiny committee on this, which is super helpful. And I know the chair is here, so that was really good, and that's been incorporated into this. But I'm sure there'll be some more questions.
Thank you. Do you want to start on how you really see the consultation panning out and the sort of practicalities of it, and etc., to make sure that we're looking really at every angle?
Of course, thank you, councillors. And I think the introductions you've both given are entirely appropriate. I think the approach that we want to take to this conversation about understanding what becoming the best in light of because of Grenfell means to people means that we have to make sure that we are reaching people, engaging people, and that they feel confident and assured to share their views with us. And I think this we have over the course since the recovery strategy has been in place, we have learned a lot from the communities and the people we serve about the specific in services that we've offered. And we have done and we have asked a lot. We've heard from thousands of people over the course of the last few years, and it will be important that we don't forget that learning and we build upon that learning. But equally, I think it's important to view this as a wider opportunity. In those different conversations that we've had and consultations that we've done, they have been about specific initiatives or services, and we've often heard from people that they want to talk about what the council means to them, what it feels like to be treated by the council, and what their visions and aspirations are for the future. And I think here, the way we've designed the questions, as Councillor Bay has said, with feedback from OSC, we've had a number of conversations with community groups over the course of the last few weeks and months as we've been discussing and developing this, has been about trying to ensure those conversations and questions are open, that they're not closed, and that the approach is really important. So within each of the different cohorts, we're going to be trying to hear from. I think we need to have tailored approaches. We need to work in partnership with the people who the community feel comfortable being represented by and trust, and make sure that in each of those different cohorts, we are offering varied ways of people engaging in this important matter. Because it's vital that we hear from as many people as possible in this process. And as I mentioned initially, that they feel confident that their voice is going to be listened to in this next moment.
I think you're absolutely right. It's that confidence, because as I said, it's got to be a shared.
Yep. We
need to get to a shared vision, and in order to do that, people have to really believe that they are being listened to, and whatever we're doing is being tailored to that.
Indeed.
So, who has any questions? Johnny.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you to Karen Callum and everybody who's helped write the paper. I think it's a really good start, and obviously it will evolve as we go through the consultations over the course of the coming months. We've talked a lot already about shared visions and priorities, and I know that one of the big things that we took away from the tragedy was that we can't work in silos anymore, and that has to apply both within the council but also in terms of our partnership working. I think it's 3.2. We talk a little bit about partnerships with the NHS and other public sector bodies. So I think my question is, how confident are we that we can leverage the influence that we have, limited though it might be in some areas, to ensure that there's a joined up response to this piece of work, which I think is the right starting point, but which will require wider buy-in to truly be a success.
Thank you, Councillor, and I think that is a really important question. And over the course of the last 5 years, we have had some success in building partnerships, but one of the limitations has been that we have had, although we had a shared set of commitments that we agreed back in 2018 with the NHS and other partners, a lot of the services that we've gone on to provide have been individually commissioned and individually arranged, that we've done our best working with the community to make sure that they work in tandem together. I think as we look into the future about what specifically when we think more about the needs and the services that we're going to want to provide to the bereavement survivors and to the people who live in the immediate vicinity, a lot of it's going to be about, or is likely to be about health and well-being. A lot of it's likely to be about understanding and coping with the sense of delayed or potentially, but hopefully not denied questions of justice. And a lot of it's going to be about the ongoing impact of the tower. And I think that those are priorities and issues that cut across just the council and very much touch on our NHS partners and other public sector bodies. So I think the more we're clear on the needs that we're likely to need to be able to meet, obviously subject to all the community needs to come, I think it really insists that we do better than we have. And the conversations that we have had into the engagement phase definitely give us hope for optimism. I think there will be work for us all to do to ensure that we turn that into a reality.
Catherine.
Thank you. And again, thank you very much, Callum and Joe and Zoff, for revising and revising this paper to come back to where we are now. It's been really helpful. And again, to Mary and the Scrutiny Committee, because I think it's got us to a much better place than where we started. I sort of got one statement and then one question. So it was the thing at the bit about aspirations, which I think is just so important. And during the Grenfell recovery, we did a piece of work which we co-designed with the community, which was called Community Works. And that was all about their aspirations to get into job and get into works. And I have to say, it was the most fantastic piece of work, because actually the group of bereavement survivors actually designed their own service as to how they could get into jobs. And I think because they've made it their own, it will be most effective for doing that. So that's sort of underlining what your aspiration in this paper is. I think it's really good. But my question is, obviously, what's really important in all of this is the voice of young people and children. And I know you've got a piece in this that you're consulting with schools, but how effective has that been before? And how do you think you might be able to make that more fun for younger children to get engaged with it?
Thank you. I think we've had some success to date, but I think we can do more and do better in this space. We're definitely looking to work with our education colleagues and schools to be able to promote the different ways that people can engage directly through their channels. We are looking at being able to develop a sort of child-friendly, if you like, more attractive, more sort of visual form of the questions we can then offer out through our partner organisations, kids clubs where people already feel comfortable. And again, it goes back to that idea of not making this just a council exercise that people may or may not be turned off by, but rather by going through the routes that people already feel comfortable expressing themselves and talking and using those routes entirely. I think it's also been important to engage with our youth council, youth mayors, and the different youth groups that we've established. So in the bereavement survivor setting, we've got a youth forum, and across the programme they exist. So making use of that will be important.
Chairman and Kim.
Mine's a bit of a short one, Callum, and I've touched on this in the past, and it always is a factor with any sort of listening exercises. You mentioned it in 7.5, about listening to the quiet voices, but it's really the silent voices, or those that don't engage, that I'm curious about. We've obviously been through this in the past where you had listening exercises. I think you had a really good response rate last time we did something like this. But how do we make sure that there is still that buy-in from those that aren't necessarily engaging? what appears to be a very comprehensive consultation plan, but just making sure that we do capture all the views, even if they don't are not so forthcoming.
Yeah, and thank you, Councillor. And I think that there, I think part of it is utilising and working in partnership with trusted organisations, but part of it is also the breadth of the different formats that we need to be really clearly signalling that we'd be welcoming feedback through. So a lot of this paper touches on the specific survey, which we think is a positive way of enabling people to feedback in a sort of quick time, if you like. But and we have made more of it through the different iterations. But to stress the point, we will be offering people one-on-one conversations, facilitated group conversations, which I think for those people who may be slightly more reluctant and might be more open to having a conversation that's facilitated, we can capture the notes from and ensure that the feedback is taken through will help. The other thing we are looking at trying to do is really reaching out to community leaders of the different parts of our community that perhaps haven't tended to engage with this process, and offering a real amount of flexibility there. So it's not articulated in this paper, but I think in the iterative ways of working that I think we will be following, I think it would be important to be flexible. So if we hear from a particular community group that they're not comfortable necessarily completing our paperwork and actually they want to be able to launch a spin-off equivalent, I think we should be open to that. And I think it'll be about signalling that we want to listen to you in whatever way that you feel comfortable.
Good, thank you.
Kim.
Yes, no, can I just add to the thanks on the excellent paper? Yeah, just reflecting on this, Callum, I mean, there are many people that are here that were obviously here when Grenfell were fully aware of what Grenfell was, but to what extent where we're getting new people coming in, should we consider things like awareness training of people in terms of the events and what's obviously the key highlights that have come from things like the inquiry? I mean, it says in your 1.3 about the whole council contributing, and it's learning from listening, I understand that, but I just wondered to what extent we should consider it.
Thank you, Councillor. Just so I understand, are you talking internally?
Yeah. Internal training.
Yeah, so I think that would be really important. And what other papers that are more internally focused articulate is that in order to establish the shared vision that Councillor Campbell articulated, I think what we are hoping to do, what we got agreement to do today, is that we would be offering a similar opportunity for our staff to contribute to this idea of what our shared vision needs to look like and can look like, which I think is going to be really important because while in many areas we've got positive relationships between staff and people we serve, I think there are areas where we can improve on that and where we can get to a space where we have a real shared understanding of what our aspirations are. And I think involving staff in that process as we're involving our community will be really important to be able to get to that shared position. And more broadly than that, we have agreed to undertake work where we are including more. We have obviously got some information, but more information in our induction processes for new joiners, as well as creating a sort of database of important expert information so that everybody has a shared understanding of the key information and key facts, not necessarily determined by us, but as articulated by key parties.
Johnny?
Yeah, I think this is obviously a crucial piece of work for the council, but I think it's really important that it's embedded across the organisation. And one of the things that 6.13, and it's come up a couple of times already tonight, is how we'll link in with the council plan, which is to an extent the foundational document for the cycle of this administration. So I was wondering if you could say a bit more about how you see it linking into that process, how we can ensure that the work we're doing here tonight, which I think has the potential to be really positive, is embedded across the organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I think there's probably two main ways that happens. One is in the consultation design. So very much in this first phase that we're seeking your agreement to undertake today, we would be going out speaking about specific Grenfell legacy initiatives and ideas about what people's aspirations are for the future. But in the autumn, we would be hoping to be able to share the feedback that we've heard from that point and ensure that's incorporated into the wider consultation work that will be happening under the council plan. So really importantly, what we are hearing isn't contained in a separate sort of Grenfell entity on the side of the organisation, but rather is incorporated into all the priorities that we're working towards. I think secondly, it's also about ensuring that we see Grenfell for what some people in the community see it as, which is about how the organisation works, how it feels, and how it feels to be treated and to have services delivered to you by the council. I think perhaps to date we've focused on specific initiatives and the needs of group survivors or housing, which is really important and will continue. But I think it's in the former that it will therefore be important that it's incorporated into the council plan and that we see it as a continuing development.
If I can add to that and say that this isn't a report that's been drafted and iterated and drafted by just Callum and Joe. Also made sure that the corporate management authority, all each of the directorate teams and combined corporate management actually understand this, go with this, and make sure that we are connecting it to the corporate plan. So whether they're service strategies or the overall plan, this really should be connected because it's not being bolted up, as you said, or separated from. It's actually integral to what each of the directorates are doing.
I guess when it comes to the council plan, it'll be one of the underlying themes, won't it? Which
Yeah, of
connects
course.
everything together. It's not going to be a pillar standing in its own right. It's just got to be underneath everything, the foundation rather than a pillar.
Indeed.
So,
Thank you. So obviously we're talking about the consultation, and I know in 7.3 you talk about all the many conversations that you and your team have had with people over the last few years. How are those going to be specifically incorporated into this next consultation phase?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Councillor. I think there were two parts of that. One is that you're absolutely right. We have heard through the conversations that have taken place, particularly over the last 18 months, but over a longer period than that, really, lots of very important feedback about specific services, about specific initiatives, and some of that points to really good ideas for new ways of working. So certainly some of the work we've done with adults and children's providers, working in new ways with grassroots organisations, which really does give kind of pointers to things that we might consider when we look right across the council's approach at the next phase of work. But I think there has been something in those conversations, and I include some of the work we've done with bereavement survivors on the dedicated service, where actually people have wanted a wider conversation about the council as a whole, the organisation as a whole, and its priorities. And there hasn't always been room for that. And I think one of the reasons we want to go down this road and the road presented to you tonight is because we think it's important to create that space explicitly so that people can have that wider conversation. That's not to say that all of the feedback we've heard today isn't important, but I think sometimes we haven't created the right kind of space for people to have that wider conversation about learning in light of Grenfell for the organisation as a whole.
So will all those conversations you've had before, will they still be part of the report when it eventually happens? I mean, there will still be some role for that.
Yes, absolutely. So we will certainly use kind of the learning, particularly the learning from those consultations, which has been more forward-looking, which has said not just about service provision now, but what should it look like in the future.
So we've come from quite a narrow angle of looking at service provision. Now we're widening it out to say, well, okay, we're not looking at these specific things, but what does the whole mean to you? And then we'll go back and drill down. Mary, do you want to just come and tell us what I know it's in the report what the OSC felt, but it's quite helpful to, I was going to say hear from people as well.
Well, really, I did want to have a word because I wanted to start off by saying that this was an exemplary example of us giving feedback, and I think everything we said was incorporated in this paper that's come to you today. And we had a very detailed discussion, as you can see in 7.5. And I was really pleased when I read through the paper. I could see what we said and how to fed back in, and I think all our recommendations were accepted. And it's given us ideas of some lines to pursue as well, particularly relating to the NHS and their involvement separately. I particularly wanted to highlight this, the suggestion that we made and was picked up about setting ourselves some targets for consultation quite explicitly, numbers of people that we're hoping to reach, because I think that, you know, if we put that out in a key decision and say this is what we're aiming for, report. It gives people a chance to say, well, that's not ambitious enough, or that is ambitious enough. I would have also liked to have seen, which I mentioned, but maybe too early for that kind of thing, is also some ambitions around the spread, say, for example, of age groups. Then maybe you have put some specific targets for other kinds of groups, like group and survivors and in the area, which is really good to see. So it's not only overall targets, it's specific individual targets. And so it's just really good to see that. So I welcome the paper, and I'm really pleased to see the comments incorporated.
Yeah, and can I ask you, did you have a discussion about alignment with the NHS? And you mentioned it. I
We
wonder
had a-
whether you could just, tell us about that.
Well, we challenged about, what the 50 million spending of the NHS, and do we really know that? And Callum and Joe explained the difficulties of how they work compared to how we work, which gave us an idea for maybe a bit of work that we could do with the NHS, looking at how we're aligned and how we work together in future, and perhaps just a bit more transparency between us, and just exploring that. So we've taken that away to think about.
Thank you. So I think there's any other questions? Ella, do you want to say anything?
Probably not, I could say that maybe at a later stage, but I think it would be important to include staff members from the borough,
Yes.
because a lot of them have been very much affected, and obviously they may have family and so on, so don't leave out the staff who are involved, and they'll have very, very different perspective on what has gone on the inside and the outside. So the ones who talk to me, Liz, you need to hear what they say.
Yeah.
Okay. So that, I think that's a different piece of work, but it is important.
Thank you. And actually, I think Barry and I are going out to staff tomorrow to talk about the next stages and where we are as a council, and this will be one of the main planks of what we talk about. So if there's no other comments, I think let's go to the recommendations, please, in paragraph 2. Which is really to note the background and the rationale for beginning planning beyond 2024, which I think we're all absolutely agreed with. And agree the high level approach and a key principle to working with residents and partners to develop a plan for the next phase of the council's work on Grenfell. And I think we're absolutely happy with that, agree? And finally, the proposal in section 6 for a proper wide-ranging conversation with the bereaved, with survivors, with the local community, so that we can have, a shared vision for a longer-term legacy, and that would really help officers prepare for the next phase of the council's work on Grenfell, and that would mean that it will come back to us early 2023. Do we all agree on all those 3 points, please, in the recommendations in paragraph 2?
Yeah.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Meeting skills. Thank you. Yes, sir.
It's raised about 3 times with ranging from 10 to
Yeah,